Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second edition of Fearless Conversations. Today, we are going to be focusing on self-advocacy, the paradox of apologizing and leadership. Our panelists today are Saida Davidson and Angela Baldwin. Our background information today is with pleasure to introduce Saida, who works for the ACLU. She has held numerous leadership positions, and she is greatly involved in the community and different initiatives. We also have with us today Angela Baldwin, who works for the Miller Law Firm. She too is very active in the community and holds a variety of leadership positions in the community. And so it is a pleasure to have both of us with us today and to turn the conversation over to them. We're going to kick it off with Saida, talking about self-advocacy. And by way of a softball question, Saida, what does self-advocacy mean to you?
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. For those of you who don't know me, self-advocacy is kind of my thing. When I was the chair of the Young Lawyers section, I ran it on that platform that self-care, self-advocacy is very important. And I kind of view it as like a three-pronged approach, right? There is the advocacy you do for yourself within your actual work environment in your office. There's the advocacy you do for yourself when you are out networking. And I like to call this don't shove me into a Navy suit type advocacy, because a Navy suit doesn't fit everybody. And then there's also the advocacy you do within yourself. What do I need to learn and how do I need to get there?
Excellent.
Do you elaborate now, or do you have a follow-up question?
You know, I was going to pitch a follow-up question. In your opinion, are there differences in how women and men are perceived in their self-advocacy efforts? But feel free to take that answer and then also roll with what you had followed up with as well.
Okay. I do definitely see all of the same differences that you would hear about, all of the cliches, right? Like if a man is advocating for himself, he's confident. If a woman is advocating for herself, she's pushy. And so, I mean, my brand of self-advocacy just kind of embraces all of the awkward, right? That's who I am. Like I've learned in advocating for myself that there are some things that I'm not going to be so smooth in saying. And I embrace that. I just am, hey, I'm so awkward. Here's a question, whatever. But kind of to elaborate on what I was saying before, if you're going to advocate for yourself at work, and this is something that I've seen when I represented women in employment discrimination, in addition to just kind of seeing it in random offices where I've worked, the biggest takeaway that I have when you go to advocate for yourself is relaxing your boundaries is not the way to advocate for more appreciation or more respect. You set your boundaries and you don't let anybody tell you when or how to relax them. Obviously, there are going to be circumstances when they will need to be relaxed. For example, you're prepping for trial, you may have to be up later than you would like to be, right? But you do that for yourself. You don't let somebody tell you what your boundaries are. It should be a rare occasion and it should be your call when you are relaxing your boundaries. If you're working somewhere and you feel unappreciated or like you're not being treated fairly, the way to get that appreciation and mutual respect, whether you're being treated differently from a man or not, is not to relax or eliminate your boundaries. This is especially so if you have, for example, let's say you stay late every night, but on Tuesdays you leave at 5 every Tuesday because there's a Pilates class that's important to you for your self-care. And maybe that's the one time that your employer talks about what time you leave. The way to get respect from that employer is not to stop going to that class. Don't fool yourself into thinking that getting rid of that class is going to get respect, because I promise you it won't. It will be a new thing once you get rid of your Tuesday night thing. You're better served to quit trying to prove yourself and just do your work the best that you can, put out a great product. People will recognize it and notice it even if your employer doesn't.
Thank you for that. That's excellent commentary about the boundaries, because it almost seems that it would be the opposite, that we feel that we need to relax them in order to be appreciated or respected. But as you indicated, that it's going to be the opposite effect. And I think that point is really well taken. I think you've touched on this, but if there's any further advice, particularly for women in the legal profession, to improve their efforts for self-advocacy, what would you think them to be?
So, I'm sorry, I have all these long-winded answers. Like I was saying, I have this thing about don't shove me in a Navy suit. And I say that because when I very first started looking for jobs out of law school, I used to put on my resume that I was very active in my law school's chapter of the ACLU. And whenever I would go to get a resume review or, get some feedback as a young lawyer, people would say to me, you run a big risk putting the ACLU on your resume. You better take it off so somebody will interview you. And I did that for a couple of years. And while I was doing that, I did not have any jobs that I loved or that I was excited to go to. And one day I realized that if someone didn't want me because I was passionate about the ACLU, that probably wasn't going to be a good fit for me anyway, because as lawyers, we're advocates and you advocate about things that you are passionate for or passionate about. So if someone's going to say, we don't want this person here who is passionate about ACLU matters, I'm not going to be comfortable advocating there. And obviously, spoiler alert, that's where I ended up, was working at the ACLU. So being true to myself got me really where I wanted to be in the long run. First few years in practice, I was suited up every time I went anywhere. I was very reserved. But once I realized that I could just be myself, people respected me more. And also, kind of think about how that plays into advocacy for your clients, right? Even if you're not going to do it for yourself, people know this person has boundaries that she won't let you cross. And that translates into your representation as well.
Thanks so much with those follow-up points, particularly about being true to oneself. I think that's a concept that may get overlooked in the legal profession, especially as young lawyers or newly entering the profession too, that there's a certain mold or model to follow. And that advice was really well taken. Kind of flipping the script a little bit on self-advocacy, but now turning to this last segment of self-advocacy portion. As leaders, in our efforts for self-advocacy and also advocacy for others, what can we be doing to encourage this amongst other people in our groups, particularly from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint?
Are you asking me specifically, or is that an open question?
So this is going to be geared more for an open question too, for both you and Angie. I know we're going to kind of pivot back and forth, and then Angie will take the second portion with paradox of apologizing, but just kind of rounding out the discussion, particularly as we advocate for others as well as on the self-advocacy of ourselves.
Angie, do you want to take this one first? I've been talking for a long time.
Sure. In regards to the self-advocacy of ourselves, one point that I would like to touch upon is, and this really applies to whether you're a young lawyer, whether you've been practicing for a very long time, follow-ups. So for example, if you have an interview, after you interview, do you feel that you should follow up? Is that a sense of self-advocacy? I would say absolutely. Having the wherewithal to push through to get what you want and following up a few times is certainly related to self-advocacy. And men have been shown to do this, and men have also been shown to apply for positions that they might not have all the credentials for, whereas women will sit back and look and say, well, I don't have the credentials for A, B, and C, I might not apply. Where studies have shown with men that that's not the case. And that is also a sense of self-advocacy. So being your own advocate and pushing through, whether it's following up to get what you want and just putting yourself out there and applying, are points of self-advocacy that I personally think can go a very long way, and that will in turn help in your leadership. You're not going to get the positions if you're not applying for the positions. And in order to do so, I think follow-up is very important. So that's just a brief topic from my perspective on self-advocacy and how that can relate to some leadership positions.
Awesome. Thank you for the follow-up, and thank you for Saida. We'll be coming back to you in a little bit once we've explored also the paradox of apologizing. But as Angie started that portion of the conversation, what about the idea? The concept is that there's a bias that women's successes are often attributed to luck, but men's successes were more attributed to skill. And so that conceptually is what we mean by the paradox of apologizing. Angie, if you want to kick it off with just some general thoughts with respect to that topic.
Sure. I've always thought and wondered why this was the case, especially knowing that there is a discrepancy between men and women when it comes to apologizing. By definition, apology is an acknowledgement of a failure or a wrongdoing, but it also depends on the context too. So for example, saying sorry can be a way of showing respect or maintaining a relationship, owning fault. However, it can also be used in a passive aggressive manner. So if you live in New York and you've got neighbors that are loud and you open up the window and you're yelling, "I'm sorry, can you turn down the radio?" That can be seen as a passive aggressive approach, right? So really understanding when to apologize is important. There's been multiple studies. One that comes to mind is University of Waterloo. It's a study in Canada that found that women tend to apologize more often because they have a lower threshold than men for what they consider to be offensive. And if you go back further down the line, generally speaking, girls are taught at a very young age to be polite and accommodating. And when you think about how boys were, taught, and this is generalizations, again, this is not every household, but, generally speaking, they're taught to be strong-willed and more bold. So I think these behaviors have reinforced throughout a variety of social structures that women go through throughout their careers, and it carries over to the workplace. So for me, there's definitely an approach that I take when it comes to apologizing. I find that if you do something wrong, there's a real strength in apologizing, but overuse of apologizing, it presents a weakness at work and in your personal relationships. So on one hand, you might think you're being kind or empathetic, but saying sorry too much can definitely give off an appearance of incompetence. It can undermine your authority or your expertise with clients, managers, colleagues. And on top of that, by always over apologizing, it kind of poses a self-doubt in your own abilities if you allow it to. So I've always kind of held the approach of stop apologizing and just start being more direct. And what I mean by this is over apologizing does not send a message of strength. Instead, it minimizes your presence and your contribution because you're overusing, just like when you overuse or overstay, anything in particular. So you want to be intentional on how you express yourself with help, and how you're going to ultimately be seen as a leader and trusted and have a trust in your authority, right? So I've got a few things that I absolutely think are important that women should not apologize for. One is asking a question. Don't start your question with, "I am sorry." So instead, use language such as, "Excuse me, could you clarify?" or "I have a question." Another is answering a question. So you're asked something that you don't have the answer to. I'll look into that, or I don't have the analysis on that case yet, are some alternative words that you can use. Getting sick. I don't know why so many women apologize for this, but when you are sick and you don't need to apologize for being ill, right? And you're protecting people when you stay at home. Requesting information or materials that you need for work. You're preparing for a meeting, you need certain supplies. Instead of saying, I'm sorry, could you get me X, Y, and Z? Just ask for what it is that you need. And finally, don't apologize for things that are out of your control. So whether or not it's your intention to apologize, excessive apology can project a poor image to clients and coworkers. And I think it's just something that we should be very cautious of.
Excellent. I think that was wonderful to provide those very specific examples, Angela. Kind of delving into this topic further, the idea sometimes that when women are successful, that they have to prove again and again that they have the requisite skills for the job, and that sometimes we see this in the reverse for men. What are your thoughts on that?
Me personally, I've always felt that I've had to work extra hard. So I'm trying to work harder and smarter because I have to prove that I, am capable. And I think women sometimes struggle with certain issues such as how they're dressed, if they're wearing makeup or too much makeup, if they deserve to be in the positions that they're in. And, unfortunately, it's not the same. Men can just put on a suit, you have your same suit and you're good. With women, it's, is my top too low? Is it too tight? Are my heels too high? These are all trigger points that I think women have to, or that they battle with throughout their career. I think that there's definitely a difference. I think when it's trying to prove yourself over and over again, it's not just your work ethic, but it's also how you come across. And sometimes you can approach someone in the same manner as a man, but if you do so, you get labeled certain words, right? These are all real issues that I think women struggle with, and it's just balancing and navigating through those waters and not apologizing for it, right? And I think it's so important to have sessions such as this and to have women that you can call and be a sounding board and bounce these ideas off of. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to bring each other up when we are, in a position to do so.
Great ideas. And this follow-up question, I think already addresses what you were saying, but if you want to go a little bit further, Angie, what can we be doing intentionally to curb the paradox, whether through our own actions, but also, as you suggest, lifting up other women?
I think that, that's a great question. In regards to kind of curbing this paradox, especially with regard to apologizing, I think the first step is to become more self-aware. So notice how many times throughout your day you're apologizing. If you need to start a log for a week, write it down, go through your emails, see how many times you've said it in an email, and see if you can identify triggers such as people or situations that cause you to over apologize. By being more self-aware, you then can replace the word sorry with more appropriate words that I discussed. So, phrases like, unfortunately, I won't be able to make it that day, or thank you for waiting for me. instead of I'm sorry I'm late, right? This trades remorse for gratitude. Or excuse me, could you repeat what it was that you said? So in order to do and change those words, you have to have some type of self-awareness. And then to be very intentional. So when you're speaking more straightforwardly and clearly, you can showcase your skills and you can feel more confident in the process. And I think confidence is key. And that is something that women definitely should not undermine, because if you are confident, it will show and others will be more confident, including clients, in you. So unnecessarily apologizing, I think, definitely can hurt your professional career. And I think that the big takeaway is to stop using it unnecessarily or as a filler word, and save your sorry for when it's truly needed.
That is great advice. 4 powerful words. The trades remorse for gratitude. Very profound. I'm going to turn the conversation over to Saida, and please, Angie, pipe up to kind of close the loop on paradox of apologizing if we've missed anything, and then we'll segue into our final and third section of leadership. But like I said, I'd like to turn to Saida if there's any follow-up with respect to this topic.
Yeah, I want to make mention of something that I think is important. You had asked earlier, Christina, whether it appears that women have to prove their qualifications over and over again, whereas men don't. And I just want to point out that when you're advocating for yourself or for any group of women, you need to keep your advocacy intersectional, by which I mean, if it's just a, if it's a woman that has to work harder to prove herself, if that woman belongs to other minority groups, it is even harder for that person to prove themselves. And we all do better when we stand up for each other. And it's important to, call out racist behavior when you see it. There is this concept is kind of just now starting to be developed through some of the case law. There is a case a few years old that recognizes that it's an employment discrimination case, and the case recognizes that Black women experience different and unique discrimination in comparison to both a white woman and a Black man, right? So it's always good to be aware of the different types of discrimination that we experience, not just as women, but as women of color, or women who have disabilities, or any number of combinations.
Great follow-up. Thank you so much for that additional information, Saida. Now, segueing into our third section, I think that was a wonderful springboard for this part of the conversation. Would both of you be able to share your story of leadership and any obstacles you faced during this process? I'm going to toss it back to Angie, and then Saida, please feel free to follow up as well.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind as far as obstacles or challenges that you face would be, instead of, for example, my work product, right? This is something that I take very much pride in. I feel like my work speaks for itself. Being complimented on something like, oh, she's nice, or she's pretty, like those are obstacles that I think often have a certain stigma related to them, because maybe you're not there for reasons why you might not be viewed as smart. There's just so many, I think, comments or issues that women they've either confided in me or I've gone through myself with regards to that. And I think that appearances it's something that women definitely struggle with, right? And it's not just, it's not just that, but it's at such an early age. You think about what it is that society says you should look like, and you look in magazines and they say this is what you know, pretty looks like, this is what success looks like, this is what a family looks like, and you have all these thoughts that you're going through in your head. And sometimes you come across the work field and you have certain people that perhaps say certain comments, or you go through certain experiences that have you second guessing that. And I think that that is something where you have to really take a deep breath and a step back and actually figure out what is it that you want to accomplish, who is it that you want to be. And if you're going to allow the outside noise to really affect who you're going to become. And I think the more comfortable you get in your own skin, the more that's going to show, and the more authoritative you'll be. Having a seat at the table is such an important thing for women, and we should never feel apologetic for it. So seeking leadership roles, I think, are very important. I know I heard about you know, Leadership Detroit, and it was something that somebody had mentioned to me that you should consider joining the program. And being able to take advantage of situations such as that, I think is instrumental in your self-worth and self-growth, and how you can actually make other people better, make your work environment better. But there has to be a desire to do it, and you have to be able to put aside the noise, and sometimes that can be something that is very difficult. But I think being a strong female leader is something that is gradual, right? It happens over time. You're just not born that way. I think that how we process information and experiences and what we gain from that. So everything that I've gone through in life, I felt, what can I take out of this? And there's a purpose for this. What can I take out of this? And I really try to use it as a constructive tool for me to do better and to be better, and to ultimately help other people who need to be lifted up. And I think sometimes with women, there's situations where you might feel there's not enough space for so many women. So what happens? You tend to compete against each other. And I don't think that that is necessarily the right approach. I think if anything, we should be helping each other, and we should be looking at how we can do better, right? And how we can learn from each other's experiences. And I think that those are very important attributes as far as leadership is concerned. You want to be able to motivate people and to be a good person, right? Ultimately be a good person, and try to do your best, whether it's work, family. Balancing it all with the legal profession is challenging, but I think it's important for us to help when we can.
Thank you. There's so many things in that segment, Angie, that I feel we could have a whole presentation on. So thank you for sharing those ideas and then expanding upon it. Going to turn it over to Saida, just a little bit about your leadership journey and any obstacles that you wanted to feature that you think would be helpful for the group to hear about and learn from.
Sure, thanks for that question. So my leadership journey actually was born from necessity. I was a career bartender before I started law school, which meant that I was going to have a really hard time finding a job out of law school. I went to go take my resume, have it reviewed in our school's career department. And I was, all I really had was I had won a mock trial and, or I got second place or something like that. And then I had like all these bar jobs. And the career and professional development person looked at my resume and she's like, yeah, nobody cares about this. And I said, well, I mean, don't people care that I'm like putting myself through law school? Like, doesn't that say something about me, that I'm working at night and I'm here? And so I had to kind of start taking on other roles to make myself more marketable, right? So that's when I started doing, Student Bar Association, and I got active with ACLU. And then when I was done with school, it was actually another former chair of the Young Lawyers section, Andrea Irons, who reached out to me and said, I know that you're having a tough time. Why don't you come shadow me in court? She had her own practice. So I came and I did the court thing with her and I got to shadow her a little bit. And then she said to me, there's an opening on the Young Lawyers section council. Are you interested? And I said, yeah, I am. So she took me under her wing and she started taking me to all of the events so that I could network with the right people. And then I did eventually get a seat on the council, which I would not have even known was the opportunity that it turned out to be, because you meet so many people, you network with so many people, you do so many events, you end up on various committees. If you do leadership track, you end up on the big board of commissioners for 3 years. It was really just a great experience. But, one thing that I will say is I learned from that experience, beware of the leader who takes responsibility for everything. If you look at your most effective leaders, the people who are respected as leaders, your Jennifer Gricos, your Samantha Orvises that I see down there in the Zoom, Angela, Christina, all of those people, watch how they promote their events that they're organizing, right? It's always, I belong to this organization and we put together this great thing. Occasionally you're going to see someone say, hey, I put this together all by myself and I'm so proud of myself. Like, there is a line between, and it's a blurry line, right? Between showing something that you've done as part of a group and also advocating for yourself. I did this great thing, right? And I think that you should be able to take credit where credit is due, but there's a way to do it. So that's a challenge, is navigating that line for sure. And leadership also, for me, I think I've kind of been around long enough at this point where I kind of have this reputation where I'm just going to say what I'm going to say. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And that's a relatively new skin for me. But now that I've had people stand up for me enough times to now know that I'm in a position where I've got to start doing it for other people too. So sometimes that whole she's going to say what she's going to say thing is interpreted as, I used to, oh, Saida thinks everyone's racist, this kind of thing, because I am routinely the person in the group that calls out racist behavior. So that's a challenge too, is sometimes if you're too loud, you're dismissed. So you have to be effective with your advocacy and know your audience. And I think something that all of us here have experienced at one, well, maybe not all of us, hopefully not all of us, but a common thing that I see among women who are talking about these types of issues is, I think everybody has that story where they go to court and they get asked if they're the court reporter, or you show up to a deposition and it's, are you the court reporter? I can't even tell you how many times that happened to me. And I would have opposing counsel. When I was at legal aid, I had double stigma, right? Because everyone thinks that legal aid lawyers aren't good, even though those jobs are very hard to get. They're very competitive. People think that you take those jobs because you couldn't get another job. And so I would have lots of opposing counsels, pretend to help me or offer to help me. Oh, here, I printed out the law for you, this kind of thing. And, that kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is you just kind of embrace who you are and know your audience, because I'll tell you what, for every opposing counsel that did that to me, I absolutely wanted them to think that this was the only job that I could get. And I wanted them to think that maybe I didn't know what I was doing a little bit. It's better for my client if they think that. So did it answer your question fully, Christina?
Absolutely, and very similar to the prior responses. I feel we could have a whole other conversation and presentation on these topics of leadership. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time and allow for Q&A at the end, but kind of one closing general conversation, and this will conclude then the recorded portion of the meeting, is what can we be doing as leaders to learn from our own lessons, but also to lift up other women and encourage them into the leadership positions?
I can start with that. I think one thing that's very important is to, one, take the time, right? So whether you're in private practice and you've got like tons of billable hours that you're trying to, meet, or workload that you're trying to balance, if you are in the public sector or whatever your position may be, perhaps even balancing family with your career, just taking the time, whatever that looks like for you, it's going to be different for every person. But if you commit to taking a certain amount of time, or just identifying maybe one or two people throughout X amount of time frame, whether that's a year or X amount of months, I think if you put that at least on your forefront, you're going to be in a better position to actually help people, right? So one of the struggles that I have is, so I've got a full load at work. I've got, I sit on a few different boards. So I'm trying to, help the community and the people that I serve in that regard. And I also really, care about my family, and I do want to have a personal life, right? So I think being able to balance that, but just set aside some time for you, I think that helps with self-advocacy. Like Saida was saying, if you've got something that is your me time, make sure that you hit that and unapologetically do so. Now, if you've got a fire at work, you have to allow some flexibility, but there's a difference between managing that and allowing others to, take away something that is important to you. But also identify time to just help others. So whether that be, volunteering your time or, reaching out, I think that at least if it's in the forefront of your mind, you're at least doing your part. But I mean, I've been very, very blessed in the fact that I think certain, opportunities have kind of doors have opened because I kind of have my nose in the ground and I'm looking for I always, keep myself busy. But at the same time, I think it's important to try to consciously set time for other people and perhaps how you can help them. Like I think back to, when somebody first took a chance on me and where I am now, right? I don't have anybody in my family that was in the legal profession that could help me navigate through these waters. So, I'm the first in my family to go to college, let alone graduate school. So for me, it was really trying to navigate through those waters and really hoping that somebody would take time to teach me and help me. And I think that that's something that's stuck with me. And it's why I do my best to carve out a certain amount of time each year to, to help others and to provide advice or, grab lunch or a coffee, whenever the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said, Angie. And I would also like to add, once you get to a point where you're finding you're in the position to kind of be the mentor a little bit more than the mentee, you're allowed to help, some women who maybe graduated behind you. I think, if you're pretty good with where you are, to me, I think that's an excellent point in your career to start kind of normalizing the stuff that everybody kind of looks down on, because there are a lot more people like you than you think. There are, you know, for example, the year that I was the chair-elect of the Young Lawyers section, I had a 4-month-old baby, and my husband got strep. So we had to, he had to like lock himself in his hotel room, and I had my suit on and I wore my baby around that event. I had him wrapped in my front, and I threw a blazer on, and he was just kind of saying hi to everybody. And he's in the group picture that year. And I remember, you know, initially some people were like, oh, why does she have her baby in that picture? But then it kind of started being like, who cares? If, you know what? People have babies. Bring them to YLS meetings, bring them to networking events. Like, this should not be such a thing. I shouldn't have to hide him, right? So, you know, and if you're insecure about something, I think it's okay to name it and talk about it. I'm new at the ACLU. I've been there for 6 months. We just had our national orientation, and they put us into breakout groups. One of the first things that I said was, hey, does anybody else have major imposter syndrome about working for such a like high profile organization? And, you know, 3 people in the room were like, thank you so much for saying that. Normalize the things that give you concern or the things that give you anxiety. Put it out there so that people can learn that they're not alone.
Thank you both very much. Such insightful commentary, advice, and follow-up. This does conclude the recorded portion of the conversation. And now I will invite, if folks want to turn on their cameras and unmute themselves and just have a dialogue, or if you feel more comfortable putting information in the chat, but really encourage commentary for like the next 10 minutes or so. And once again, thank you so much to both Saida and Angie for a wonderful presentation today.